Why does 8 inches of black steel change everything? The parking lot stretched out under sodium lights, concrete gleaming like a battlefield prepared for something inevitable. 21:30 on a Monday night at Naval Special Warfare Center, Coronado. The kind of hour when honest people are home with their families, when the only souls left on base are those with something to prove or something to hide. Alina Ramsey stood perfectly still beside her midnight blue Ford Raptor, keys in her left hand. Right hand resting near the small canister of pepper spray on her belt. Not reaching, not threatening, just aware. Her breathing was controlled, measured, the kind of calm that comes from training so deep it bypasses thought entirely. 30 feet away, Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan swayed slightly, alcohol evident in the looseness of his movements, in the way his shoulders rolled with each step. He wasn't alone. 2 other Rangers flanked him, wolves closing on prey. The taller one, Corporal Dylan Porter, looked nervous. His eyes darted between Cole and Alina, between the parking lot cameras and the distant lights of the security office. The stockier one, Corporal Anders, had his hands half raised, as if already regretting whatever was about to happen. Cole's voice carried that particular edge, wounded pride wrapped in beer courage. "You know what you did today. You embarrassed me in front of my men, in front of Navy brass, made me look weak." Alina's green eyes never left his face. She'd seen this before. Different uniforms, different faces, same story. Men who couldn't handle being bested by someone half their size. Someone who made them question everything they thought they knew about strength. "That wasn't my intention, Sergeant," she said quietly. "I was demonstrating a technique. That's my job." Cole took 3 steps forward. The distance closed to 20 feet. "Your job," he said, and the word came out twisted. "Your job is to know your place." Anders backed up a step. "Cole, man, this is a Navy base. Security cameras everywhere. They'll court-martial you." But Cole wasn't listening anymore. His right hand moved to his belt. When it came back up, 8 inches of black steel caught the parking lot lights. A Ka-Bar knife. The iconic blade carried by Marines, adopted by operators across all branches. The kind of weapon that has one purpose when drawn in anger. Alina's world narrowed to that blade. Just the knife. Just the threat. Just the calculation of distance and angle and timing that her father had drilled into her since she was 5 years old. "Just going to teach you a lesson," Cole said, his words slurring slightly. "Remind you what happens when you disrespect a Ranger." The knife changed everything. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was attempted murder. But here's what most people don't understand about violence. The moment before it happens, time doesn't speed up. It slows down. Every detail becomes crystal clear. The tremor in Porter's hands, the way Anders had already started backing toward his vehicle, the slight catch in Cole's breathing. The weight of her father's dog tags under her shirt, pressing against her sternum like a reminder of every lesson, every principle, every moment that had led to this parking lot on this night. And then the image froze, suspended in that terrible moment before violence erupts. Because to understand how 3 Army Rangers ended up in a Navy parking lot with a drawn knife and a woman who refused to run, you have to go back. 18 hours earlier, when the sun was rising instead of setting, when everything looked so much simpler. The Pacific dawn broke over Coronado like liquid gold spilling across the training grounds. Orange and crimson bands stretching across a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Salt air mixed with the sharp scent of determination as 60 SEAL candidates gathered on the beach, their breath forming small clouds in the cool morning air. It was 0600 on a Monday that would change everything. Alina Ramsey stood at the head of the formation, her compact 5'3" frame silhouetted against the rising sun. Red hair pulled back in a regulation bun, green eyes scanning the rows of exhausted men before her. At 26, she looked more like a college athlete than someone who'd survived 2 combat deployments. Iraq, Syria, shrapnel wound that ended her intelligence career and started something else, something she was still figuring out. "Obstacle course," she called out, her voice carrying that particular quality of command that comes not from volume but from absolute certainty. Full gear, 14 minutes. Anyone slower runs it again. A few candidates exchanged glances. The standard time was 18 minutes. She was pushing them, testing them the way her father had pushed every SEAL who'd passed through his hands during 36 years of service. Admiral James Ramsay had been a legend. SEAL team operations in Grenada, Gulf War hero, the man who'd written half the close-quarters combat manual still used today. Cancer had taken him in 2019, but his legacy lived in every corner of this base. And most powerfully, in the daughter he'd trained from the age of 5. The candidates moved out, boots pounding sand. Alina watched them attack the first obstacle, a 30-foot cargo net that swayed treacherously in the ocean breeze. This was her world now. After the shrapnel wound in Syria had ended her intelligence career, teaching had seemed like a consolation prize. She discovered it was something more, something essential. "They're still pushing them hard, I see." The voice came from behind her, warm with approval and age. Captain William Crawford, 68 years old and retired for 7 years but still carrying himself like the SEAL instructor he'd been for 4 decades. Silver hair cropped military short, weathered face creased with smile lines earned from training 3 generations of warriors. They called him Dutch. Nobody remembered why. Alina's formal bearing softened slightly. "Didn't expect you this early." "Couldn't sleep." Dutch moved to stand beside her, his eyes tracking the candidates with the automatic assessment of a lifelong teacher. "Kept thinking about your dad. 5 years ago yesterday, he pinned on his Admiral stars. Seems like last week." They stood in silence for a moment, watching a candidate struggle with the rope climb. The young man's arms trembled, his grip failing. He fell, hit the sand, immediately jumped up to try again. "That one's got heart," Dutch observed. "Heart's not enough. He's using his arms instead of his legs." Alina's voice held the patient precision of someone who'd taught this lesson 1,000 times. "Ramsay method says lock your feet, drive with your hips, let the big muscles do the work." Dutch smiled slightly. "I remember when your dad first showed me that technique. 1985, I think. Turned conventional rope climbing on its head, cut training injuries by 40%. Alina watched the candidate try again, this time adjusting his technique. He made it halfway up before fatigue claimed him. Better, learning. "The Rangers are coming today." Dutch's tone shifted, careful, measured. "Joint training program. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell asked me to observe." "I know, 1,400 hours." Alina kept her eyes on the course, but something in her voice tightened. 75th Regiment, fresh from Afghanistan rotation. "Some of them are going to have attitudes." "Old school thinking," Dutch said carefully. He'd fought these battles before, in different decades under different circumstances. "Just watch yourself, Cat." Cat, the nickname her father had given her at age 7, after she'd climbed the obstacle course tower when nobody was looking. 30 feet up with no safety equipment. No fear, just determination. He'd been furious and proud in equal measure, called her his little mountain cat after that. "I know the type," Alina said. Dutch turned to face her fully. In the morning light, she could see the concern etched in his features, the protective instinct that had made him drive from his home in La Jala at dawn to deliver this warning. "I've dealt with worse than attitudes, Dutch." "I know you have." He paused, then added quietly, "but your dad isn't here anymore to back you up." Alina's hand moved unconsciously to the dog tags she wore under her shirt. Her father's dog tags, worn thin from years against his chest, handed to her by the Navy chaplain the day after cancer finally claimed the toughest man she'd ever known. "I don't need him to back me up," she said softly. "He taught me to back myself up." Dutch's expression shifted to something like pride mixed with worry. "He did at that." A whistle cut the air. The first candidate had finished the course. 14 minutes, 32 seconds. Alina checked her stopwatch and nodded approval. "I'll be fine," she told Dutch. "It's just a training demonstration." But the old SEAL instructor had learned to trust his instincts over 40 years of combat and teaching. Something about today felt off. He couldn't name it, couldn't point to a specific reason, just a tightness in his chest, a whisper of warning his younger self would have called superstition, and his current self knew better than to ignore. "I'll be in the observation room this afternoon," he said, "just in case." The candidates were finishing now, most making the time, a few falling short and turning around to run it again without being told. Good discipline. Elena made mental notes on each one. These weren't just bodies to push through training. Each was someone's son, someone's husband, someone's brother. Each would go into harm's way relying on what she taught them. "Dismissed," she called out. "Hit the mess for breakfast. Then combat water survival at 0900. Don't be late." The candidates scattered, some limping, all moving with that particular exhaustion that comes from pushing past what you thought were your limits. Elena gathered her clipboard and turned toward the administrative building. The sun was higher now, the fog burning off. It was going to be a beautiful day, the kind of day that makes you believe everything will work out fine. But some days lie to you. Some days promise sunshine and deliver storms. And some days, a simple training demonstration becomes the moment everything changes. Because here's what Elena didn't know as she walked across that beach in the California morning sun. 300 miles away, in a federal building in Los Angeles, an FBI agent was reviewing surveillance footage from a warehouse in San Pedro. An arms trafficking investigation that had been running for 8 months. And on that footage, partially obscured by shipping containers but visible enough to matter, was the face of a man wearing Army Ranger tabs. A man who would be at Coronado in exactly 7 hours. A man who thought he was coming for a joint training exercise. Who had no idea he was walking into a trap that had been set long before he even knew Elena Ramsey's name. But Elena didn't know that yet. As she climbed the steps to the admin building, she was thinking about lesson plans, about the best way to demonstrate leverage points without injuring her demonstration partner, about whether she had time to grab coffee before the afternoon session. Normal thoughts, ordinary concerns, the quiet moments before everything explodes. Sometimes the most dangerous moments in our lives arrive dressed in such ordinary clothing that we don't recognize them until it's far too late. Why do grown men fear being taught by someone half their size? 1,400 hours came with the precision of military timing and the weight of unspoken tension. The training mat in Building 7 had been set up like a small arena, 40 feet by 40 feet of high-impact foam covered in regulation gray canvas. Along one wall, bleachers held 30 SEAL candidates, their faces showing the healthy curiosity of warriors who'd come to learn. Along the opposite wall, 20 Army Rangers sat with their arms crossed, body language screaming skepticism. In the observation room above, Dutch sat beside Lieutenant Commander Garrett Mitchell and several other senior officers. The glass was one way. They could see everything, be seen by no one. Elena stood center mat in her physical training uniform. Black shorts, gray navy shirt, feet bare against the canvas. She looked tiny in that space, 5'3", maybe 120 pounds, red hair pulled back tight, no jewelry except her father's dog tags under her shirt. Against her, Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan looked like a different species, 6'2", 235 pounds, Ranger scroll on his shoulder, combat infantry badge on his chest. A career built on physical dominance and the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from never being told no. "Afternoon, everyone," Elena began, her voice carried without strain. "Today we're covering close quarters defensive tactics, specifically how to neutralize an attacker who has significant size and strength advantage. This isn't theory. This isn't classroom work. This is applied physics and anatomy combined with timing and leverage." Cole shifted his weight, a small movement, but Elena saw it, the slight roll of his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened. He was already dismissing her. The Ramsay method, Alina continued, was developed by Admiral James Ramsay over 36 years of operational experience. It's been tested in every combat theater since Grenada. It saved lives, and it works regardless of your size or strength. She gestured to Cole. Sergeant Brennan has volunteered to help demonstrate. Cole, if you would. He stood, moved onto the mat with that particular swagger of someone who's never lost a physical confrontation. The SEAL candidates leaned forward. The Rangers leaned back. In the observation room, Dutch's jaw tightened. "Sergeant, I want you to attempt to restrain me," Alina said. "Use your strength advantage. Try to force me to the ground. Don't hold back." Cole glanced at his men, then at the SEAL candidates, then back at Alina. "Ma'am, I don't want to hurt you." There it was, the condescension wrapped in false courtesy. Alina had heard it 1,000 times, from instructors who didn't think she belonged, from fellow soldiers who saw her father's name and assumed nepotism, from men who couldn't conceive that competence transcended gender. "You won't," she said simply. Cole's expression shifted, just slightly, from patronizing to annoyed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I outweigh you by over 100 pounds. "Yes," Alina agreed, "and I'm going to use every ounce of that against you, whenever you're ready, Sergeant." He moved, fast for his size, hands reaching to grab her shoulders, the classic dominant position that bigger men default to because it's always worked before. Alina waited until his weight committed, until he was leaning forward, balance shifted onto his front foot. Then she moved, not away, toward, into his center of gravity. Her right hand caught his left wrist, redirected his momentum. Her left hand found his elbow, applied pressure at the joint. Physics took over. His own forward motion combined with her leverage sent him rotating, airborne for a fraction of a second. Then the mat rose up to meet him. Hard. The impact echoed through the building. Cole landed flat on his back, wind knocked out, confusion on his face. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. Alina stepped back, extended her hand. The key isn't strength, it's using their strength against them. Momentum is momentum. Mass is mass. Doesn't matter if it's theirs or yours. Cole ignored her hand, rolled to his feet. His face had gone red, not from exertion, from something darker. "Again," he said. "Sergeant, I think we've demonstrated the—" "Again." Alina glanced at the observation room. She couldn't see Dutch, but she knew he was watching, knew what he was thinking. Walk away, de-escalate, choose the high road. But sometimes the high road lets the wrong lessons take root. Sometimes you have to make a point so clear that even wounded pride can't ignore it. "All right," she said, "but this time I want you to really try. No holding back, use everything you have." Cole's smile had no humor in it. "Yes, ma'am." He came at her differently this time. Lower, more aggressive. The way Rangers are trained to close distance and dominate through overwhelming force. Alina waited, watched his eyes, his hips, the slight telegraph of movement that comes just before action. When he reached for her, she was already moving. Drop step, weight shift. Her right hand found his right wrist, rotated it, applied pressure at the nerve cluster. His hand opened involuntarily. She continued the motion, spun behind him. Used his own momentum to drive him forward, swept his front leg. He went down again, harder this time, face first into the mat. The SEAL candidates erupted in applause. The Rangers sat in silence. In the observation room, Mitchell leaned toward Dutch. "She's her father's daughter." "That's what worries me," Dutch replied quietly. Alina helped Cole up, or tried to. He shoved her hand away, rose on his own. His breathing was heavy now, not from exertion, from humiliation, from the realization that 30 men had just watched him get taken down twice by someone he dismissed as insignificant. "The technique works because it respects physics," Alina said, addressing the room. "Your body doesn't care about gender, it cares about leverage points, joint manipulation, balance and momentum. Admiral Ramsay used to say, small doesn't mean weak, it means efficient." She ran through 6 more demonstrations. Different attacks, different responses. Each time the principle remained the same. Use their size against them. Don't fight strength with strength. Fight physics with physics. The SEAL candidates took notes, asked questions, moved onto the mat to practice the techniques themselves. But the Rangers remained seated, arms crossed. Cole stood to the side, jaw clenched, watching her teach with an expression that made Dutch's instincts scream warning. After 90 minutes, Alina called time. "Thank you, everyone. Sergeant Brennan, I appreciate your assistance." Cole said nothing, just turned and walked out. His Rangers followed. The last one out, Corporal Anders, paused at the door, looked back at Alina, opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it, followed his team out. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell came down from the observation room. "Outstanding demonstration, petty officer ramps. Exactly the kind of joint training we need to be doing." Alina nodded, accepted the praise, but her eyes were on the door where Cole had exited, something in his final look, the way his hands had clenched, the tightness in his shoulders. She'd seen that look before, in Syria, on the face of a man 3 seconds before he opened fire on a convoy, rage looking for justification, pride demanding satisfaction. Dutch appeared at her elbow, spoke quietly. "You handled that well, Kat, but watch yourself. Men like that don't forget being humiliated in front of their peers." "I wasn't trying to humiliate him. I was teaching a technique." "Doesn't matter what you were trying to do, matters what he thinks you did." Dutch glanced toward the door. "He's going to stew on this, and when men like him stew, they make bad decisions." Alina wanted to argue, wanted to say that Cole was a professional, that they were all adults, that one training demonstration shouldn't become personal, but she'd been around military men her entire life, knew the culture, the unspoken codes, the way some men's identities were so wrapped up in physical dominance that any challenge felt existential. "I'll be careful," she said. Dutch didn't look convinced. "Your dad would tell you to request an escort to your vehicle tonight." "Dad would tell me that backing down teaches the wrong lesson." Alina gathered her training materials. "Besides, nothing's going to happen. It was just a demonstration." But as she said it, she felt a cold touch at the base of her spine. Intuition. The same feeling she'd had in Syria 3 seconds before the IED detonated. The sense that the universe was trying to warn her about something she couldn't quite see yet. The rest of the afternoon passed normally. Combat water survival training, candidate evaluations, administrative paperwork. By 1900 hours, most of the base had cleared out. Evening shift was sparse, just security patrols and a few night classes in adjacent buildings. Alina stayed late to finish her reports, the kind of mundane task that always piled up when you spent your days teaching. By the time she logged off her computer and gathered her things, it was 2100 hours. The parking lot was nearly empty when she stepped outside. Sodium lights casting everything in shades of orange and shadow. Her truck sat in the far corner. She'd parked there this morning when the lot was full. Now it seemed very far away, very isolated. She started walking, keys in hand, phone in her pocket, aware of her surroundings the way her father had taught her, always knowing your exits, always watching for threats, always maintaining tactical awareness even in safe spaces. Because safe is relative, and sometimes the most dangerous place is the one where you feel secure. She was halfway to her truck when she saw them, 3 figures near her vehicle, not passing by, standing, waiting. Even from this distance she recognized Cole's posture, the way he stood with his weight slightly forward, aggressive, predatory. The other 2 Rangers flanked him, Porter on the left looking nervous, Anders on the right, hands half raised like he wanted to be anywhere else. Alina didn't change her pace, didn't speed up or slow down, just kept walking with the same steady cadence, calculating distances, assessing angles. Her right hand moved to her belt, found the pepper spray. Her left hand stayed on her keys. She could use them as a weapon if necessary. Car key between the fingers, aim for the eyes. "Evening, ma'am," Cole's voice carried across the empty lot, Friendly on the surface, menace underneath. Alina stopped 15 feet away. "Sergeant Brennan, can I help you?" "Just wanted to talk about today's demonstration." He took a step forward. The smell of alcohol hit her from 10 feet away. "Wanted to make sure we understood each other." "I think today's demonstration was clear," Alina said evenly. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss?" Cole's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Yeah, I wanted to discuss respect. You know, that thing you don't seem to have for Army Rangers." "I have tremendous respect for the 75th Regiment," Alina replied. "My father trained with Rangers in Grenada. He always spoke highly of your capabilities." "Your father," Cole spat the words. "You know what I think. I think you hide behind his name. I think you're nobody without him. Just another diversity hire playing soldier." Anders took a step back. "Cole, man, this isn't." "Shut up, Anders." Cole's attention never left Alina. "I'm talking to the lady who thinks she's better than us, who thinks she can embarrass a ranger in front of his men and walk away like nothing happened." Alina's heart was pounding now, but her voice remained steady. "Sergeant, you're drunk. You're on federal property making threats. I suggest you return to your quarters before this becomes something you can't take back." "Take back?" Cole laughed, sharp and bitter. "I'm not taking anything back. I'm moving forward." That's when Porter stepped forward, younger than Cole, less damaged. "Sergeant, she's right. We should go. This is a bad idea." For a moment, Alina thought it might work, thought Porter's intervention might be the circuit breaker that stopped whatever was about to happen. But then Cole's hand moved to his belt, and when it came back up, moonlight caught steel. The Kabar knife looked massive in the parking lot lights. 8 inches of black steel with a blood groove down the center. The kind of weapon designed for one thing: killing. "Now we're going to have a real demonstration," Cole said, his words slurring slightly. "Going to show you what happens when you disrespect a ranger." Anders was backing toward his vehicle. Porter stood frozen. And Alina understood with perfect clarity that she was alone, that whatever happened next, she would face it by herself. That all her training, all her preparation, all her father's lessons had led to this parking lot on this night. The knife changed everything, made this attempted murder, made it a life-or-death situation. And somewhere in the back of Alina's mind, a cold calculation began. Distance to her truck, too far. Distance to the nearest building, 50 yards. Her chances of outrunning a man with a 100-pound weight advantage and 80 feet head start, 0. Her options for calling for help. The nearest security office was 3 buildings away. By the time anyone arrived, it would be over. So she did what her father had taught her, what every instinct screamed at her to do. She stopped running through escape scenarios and started running through combat scenarios. Because sometimes there is no avoiding violence. Sometimes the only way out is through. "Sergeant Brennan," she said, and her voice held the same tone she used with candidates who were about to fail. "You're making a choice right now that will end your career and possibly your life. I'm giving you one chance to walk away." Cole took another step forward. "You're not in a position to give me anything." "That's where you're wrong," Alina said softly. "You see that camera up there?" She pointed to the parking lot security camera 15 feet above them. "It's recording everything. Audio and video, every threat you've made, every step you've taken. Your DNA is going to be all over that knife. And when this is over, whether you hurt me or not, you're going to federal prison." For the first time, doubt flickered across Cole's face. He glanced at the camera, then back at Alina, then at Porter and Anders, who were both backing away now, distancing themselves from what was about to happen. "I don't care," Cole said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "You humiliated me, made me look weak, made me look like I couldn't handle a woman half my size." And there it was, the core of it. Not about technique or training or respect, about ego. About a man whose entire identity was wrapped up in being the biggest, the strongest, the most dangerous person in any room. And when that identity cracked, when someone showed him that size didn't equal capability, his world crumbled. "I didn't make you look weak," Alina said quietly. "I demonstrated a technique. Your reaction to it is what defines you." Cole's grip tightened on the knife. Shut up and accept what's coming." He started forward, and Alina's training took over. Everything her father had taught her, everything she'd learned in 2 combat deployments, everything Dutch had reinforced over years of mentorship. Her world narrowed to the threat, to the distance, to the angle of attack, to the countless hours spent drilling scenarios exactly like this. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, sometimes it prepares, and when the moment comes, it simply acts. What do you do when 8 inches of steel is coming toward your throat? Time fractured, the way it always does when violence erupts. Each microsecond stretched into something observable, analyzable. Cole committed to his attack, forward momentum carrying him toward Alina. The knife held low, professional grip, blade angled upward toward her midsection. A killing stroke. No warning, no hesitation. Just the motion of a man who decided that his wounded pride was worth a federal murder charge. Alina moved, not away, toward. The cardinal rule of knife defense that most people don't understand. You don't retreat from a blade, you close the distance. Control the weapon arm. Eliminate the angle of attack before it develops power. Her left hand shot out, grabbed Cole's right wrist, redirected it away from her body. Her right hand came up under his elbow, applied pressure to the joint. His forward momentum worked against him. The same principle she demonstrated earlier on the training mat. Physics doesn't care about gender or intent, it just is. She rotated her body, used his weight and speed to spin him. His knife hand twisted. The weapon tumbled from his grip, clattered across the concrete. But Cole was combat trained, experienced. He didn't freeze when he lost the knife, didn't hesitate. His left fist came around in a hook that would have shattered her jaw if it landed. Alina dropped under it, let the punch sail past, used the opening to sweep his front leg. 235 pounds of Ranger hit the concrete. Hard, she was on him instantly, knee in his back. His right arm twisted up between his shoulder blades, her left hand pressing his face into the ground. "Don't move," she said, voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Porter, call security, now." But Porter wasn't moving. He stood frozen, phone in his hand, eyes wide, caught between loyalty to his sergeant and the reality of what he was witnessing. Anders had already disappeared, running toward the security office or running away from the situation entirely. Cole bucked under her, tried to throw her off with raw strength, but she'd positioned her weight perfectly, center of gravity over his shoulder blades, leverage negating his size advantage. Every time he moved, she applied more pressure to his twisted arm, not enough to dislocate the shoulder, just enough to make him understand that fighting would only increase his pain. "You're done," she said quietly. "It's over, accept it." That's when she heard the footsteps, fast, coming from behind. She turned her head just enough to see Porter moving, not toward the security office, toward her. His expression confused, conflicted, but his body language clear. He was going to intervene, going to try to pull her off his sergeant. Alina's mind raced through options. She couldn't control 2 men at once. If she released Cole to deal with Porter, the sergeant would recover, would re-engage. And this time she might not be fast enough, might not be lucky enough. But if she maintained position on Cole, Porter would reach her in 3 seconds, would grab her from behind, and then she'd be fighting both of them. The decision made itself. She released Cole's arm, rolled right, came up in a defensive crouch. Cole groaned and started pushing himself up. Porter was 2 steps away, his hands reaching for her shoulders. She waited, timing everything. When his hands committed, when his weight shifted forward, she moved, grabbed his right hand, used his momentum to pull him past her. Her foot caught his ankle, simple trip. He went down, hit the concrete beside Cole. Both men were on the ground, both starting to rise. Alina backed toward her truck, 5 steps, 10. Her hand found the pepper spray on her belt. She pulled it free, aimed it at both men. "Stay down," she commanded. "Security is already on the way. Porter, do not make this worse than it already is." Porter looked at her, at Cole, at the knife lying on the ground between them, and something in his expression shifted. The confusion cleared, replaced by a sick understanding of what they'd almost done, what they'd been part of. He put his hands up, stayed on the ground. But Cole wasn't done. He pulled himself to his feet, swaying slightly, blood trickling from where his face had met the concrete. His eyes held something beyond rage now, something cold and calculating. He looked at the knife, looked at Alina, started moving toward the blade. "Don't," Alina said. She depressed the pepper spray trigger, gave him warning. "I will put you down again." Cole smiled, that terrible smile that has no humor in it, just violence deferred. He kept moving, slow, deliberate, making his intentions clear. Alina understood then that he wasn't going to stop. That wounded pride had metastasized into something more dangerous, a need to win regardless of consequences, to prove himself even if it meant prison or death. She'd seen it before, in combat zones, in men who'd been broken by war and then broken again by coming home to a world that didn't need their particular skills anymore. She raised the pepper spray, last warning. Cole bent to pick up the knife, and Alina was about to spray him when new lights flooded the parking lot. A security patrol vehicle screeched to a stop 15 feet away. Two master-at arms burst out, weapons drawn, commands echoing across the empty concrete. "On the ground, both of you, hands where we can see them." Cole froze, knife in his hand, caught between his rage and the sudden appearance of armed authority. Porter immediately complied, flat on the ground, hands behind his head, but Cole stood there, calculating, weighing options that all led to the same conclusion. One of the master-at-arms advanced, dropped the weapon now. For a long moment nothing moved. The entire world held its breath. Then slowly Cole's hand opened. The crowbar clattered to the concrete for the second time. He put his hands behind his head, dropped to his knees, and as he did, Alina saw something in his expression that chilled her more than his rage had. Satisfaction, as if this outcome had been his goal all along. The master-at-arms secured both men, cuffed them, read them their rights. The second MA approached Alina. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She shook her head, found her voice. "I'm fine, but we need to preserve the security footage from that camera. Everything that happened here needs to be documented." "Already being done, ma'am." The MA studied her face. "You're Petty Officer Ramsay, aren't you? The hand-to-hand combat instructor." "Yes." "Your father trained my father, Admiral James Ramsay, 1998, pre-deployment workup before Kosovo." The MA's expression shifted to something like respect. "He would have been proud of how you handled this." More vehicles arrived, security officers, shore patrol. Within 5 minutes the parking lot was flooded with lights and personnel. Dutch appeared at Alina's side. He must have been listening to the security frequency, must have recognized her name in the radio traffic. He didn't say anything, just put a hand on her shoulder, grounded her. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell arrived next, took in the scene. The two Rangers in custody, the knife being photographed as evidence. Alina standing with her training materials still clutched in one hand, pepper spray in the other. He approached her carefully. "Petty Officer Ramsay, are you all right?" "Yes, sir." "Did either of these men touch you?" "No, sir. I was able to defend myself." Mitchell's jaw tightened. That was attempted murder on federal property against a Navy instructor. He looked at Cole, who was sitting in the back of a patrol vehicle. He just ended his career and his freedom for the next 20 years. But Alina was looking at Porter, at the young corporal who'd tried to help his sergeant, who'd made a terrible decision in the heat of the moment, who was now being read his Miranda rights, his military career over before it really started. "Sir," she said quietly, Corporal Porter attempted to intervene, but I don't think he understood what was happening. He wasn't part of the initial assault. He was confused. Mitchell studied her. You're trying to protect him. I'm trying to be fair, Alina corrected. Sergeant Brennan drew the weapon, made the threats, initiated the attack. Porter made a bad choice, but it was reactive, not premeditated. That's for the prosecutors to decide. Mitchell gestured to an ambulance that had arrived. I want you checked out by medical. Even if you're not injured, we need documentation. Alina nodded. Let the paramedics lead her away, check her vitals, look for injuries, find none. Through it all, she felt oddly disconnected, as if she was watching this happen to someone else. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a strange clarity. She'd done everything right, maintained her composure, defended herself without escalating, neutralized threats without causing serious injury. But she also understood that this moment would define her, not the years of training, not the combat deployments, not the degrees or certifications. This, a parking lot confrontation with a drunk sergeant and a knife. Dutch appeared at the ambulance. They're taking Brennan and Porter to base security. Federal agents are already on the way. This is going to be a big case. Alina nodded. She was thinking about Cole's final expression, the satisfaction. Dutch, she said slowly. Something's wrong. Cole looked relieved when they arrested him, like that's what he wanted. Men like him don't think rationally after being humiliated. Don't try to find logic in it. But Alina couldn't shake the feeling, the sense that she was missing something, that this confrontation had been about more than wounded pride. She thought about the timing, the way Cole had waited in the parking lot, the way he'd had his men with him as witnesses, the way he'd drawn the knife where cameras would catch everything. What if he wanted to get caught, she said. What if this wasn't about hurting me? What if it was about creating a situation where he'd be taken into custody? Dutch frowned. Why would a ranger want to be arrested? Alina didn't have an answer. Not yet. But somewhere in the back of her mind, pieces were moving, connecting in ways she didn't fully understand. She thought about federal investigations, about arms trafficking, about the way Anders had disappeared immediately, the way Porter had seemed genuinely confused about what they were doing there. The paramedic cleared her. No injuries, no signs of shock, just elevated heart rate and blood pressure consistent with a recent physical confrontation. Mitchell approached as she climbed down from the ambulance. I've spoken with the base commander, he said. We're going to need a full statement from you, tonight, while everything is fresh. Understood, sir. And Petty Officer Ramsay, Mitchell's voice softened slightly. You may have saved your own life tonight, but you also may have ended the careers of 2 Army Rangers. That's going to create waves. Are you prepared for that? Alina thought about her father, about the lessons he'd taught her, about honor and duty and the heavy cost of doing what's right. Sir, they ended their own careers. I just survived. Mitchell nodded slowly. Your father would have said the same thing. He paused. He also would have told you to take some leave, process this, but I'm guessing you're not going to do that. Candidates have combat water survival training tomorrow morning at 0600, Alina said. They need their instructor. Candidates can have another instructor for a few days. With respect, sir, no they can't. Alina met his gaze steadily. If I take leave now, I'm sending a message that I'm traumatized, damaged, unable to continue my duties, and every candidate in this program will remember that. We'll learn that when things get hard, you step back. That's not the lesson I want to teach. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, small but genuine. You really are his daughter, he glanced at Dutch. Make sure she's not alone tonight, that's an order. Dutch nodded, already planning on it, sir. The next few hours blurred together. Formal statements to base security, interviews with federal agents, paperwork documenting every second of the confrontation. Alina recounted it all with clinical precision. No emotion, just facts, time stamps and distances and actions and reactions. It was 0200 when she finally left the security building. Dutch walked beside her, silent but present. The parking lot where everything had happened was empty now. Crime scene tape cordoned off her truck. They'd need to process it for evidence. Check for fingerprints, DNA, document every detail. "You can't drive that tonight anyway," Dutch said. "I'll take you home." Alina nodded, too tired to argue. They walked to Dutch's truck in silence. As they pulled out of the base, she looked back at the sodium lights, at the concrete and buildings that had been her world for the past year. Everything looked the same, but she felt different, changed in ways she couldn't quite name yet. "You did good tonight, Kat," Dutch said quietly. "Your dad would have been proud." Alina touched the dog tags under her shirt, felt the worn metal. "He would have told me I should have avoided the situation entirely." Maybe, but he also would have understood that sometimes situations can't be avoided. Sometimes they find you. Dutch glanced at her. "You're going to be okay. This won't break you." Alina wasn't sure about that. Wasn't sure about anything except that tomorrow morning 60 SEAL candidates would be waiting for their instructor. And she'd be there. Because that's what duty meant. That's what honor required. That's what her father had taught her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak about its wounds. Sometimes it simply shows up the next morning and does the work anyway. What makes a ranger turn on his own team? The federal building in Los Angeles was deliberately unmarked. 13th floor of a glass tower in Century City, indistinguishable from the law firms and corporate offices that surrounded it. But inside Conference Room C, the atmosphere was pure law enforcement. White boards covered in photographs and connecting lines. Surveillance equipment stacked against one wall. 6 federal agents and 2 Navy investigators seated around a table that had seen 1,000 cases just like this. Agent Victoria Kane stood at the head of the table, 42 years old, 18 years with the FBI, specialist in military arms trafficking with a particular focus on soldiers who'd brought the war home in ways that crossed legal lines. She was looking at 2 photographs projected on the screen. Staff Sergeant Cole Brennan, Corporal Dylan Porter, both in Army dress uniforms, both wearing Ranger tabs, both now sitting in federal custody at Naval Special Warfare Center Coronado. "This is what we know," she began. 8 months ago, we initiated Operation Steel Pipeline, a joint task force targeting illegal weapons flowing out of military bases and into criminal organizations. Our intelligence indicated that someone with access to naval special warfare armories was diverting weapons. Specifically, M4 carbines, Glock 19 pistols, and high-capacity magazines. Small quantities. Careful. Professional. She clicked to the next slide. Surveillance footage from a warehouse in San Pedro. Grainy, partially obscured, but clear enough to show military equipment being loaded into unmarked vans. 3 weeks ago, we identified Brennan in the background of this footage. He shouldn't have been there. The 75th Regiment was on leave status. No official business in Los Angeles, but there he is, standing next to a known arms dealer named Marcus Chen. One of the Navy investigators leaned forward. "You're saying a Ranger was trafficking weapons out of a Navy base?" "Not alone," Kane replied. "We believe he had inside help, someone with access to the armories at Coronado, someone who could manipulate inventory records, make weapons disappear without triggering audits." She paused. "We think that someone was Navy, possibly someone with a security clearance and trusted access." The room went silent. The implications hung heavy. Military arms trafficking wasn't just a crime. It was treason. Weapons meant for defending the country ending up in the hands of gangs, cartels, domestic terrorists. Every stolen rifle potentially used against American citizens. "Last week we got authorization to bring Brennan in for questioning," Kane continued. "But we needed him isolated, away from his unit, somewhere we could control the environment." She clicked to the next slide. A joint training schedule. When we saw he was scheduled for training at Coronado, we saw our opportunity. Bring him onto a Navy base, away from Army support, in a location where we had complete control. You set him up, one of the agents said. We created an opportunity for him to make contact with his accomplice, Kane corrected. We were monitoring his communications, tracking his movements, waiting for him to reach out to whoever was helping him move weapons out of the base. She clicked again. The parking lot footage from last night. Elena standing beside her truck, Cole approaching with a knife. Instead, we got this. Everyone in the room watched the footage play out. Cole drawing the weapon, Elena's defense, the takedown, the arrival of security. When it finished, the room remained silent. What we don't understand, Kane said slowly, is why Brennan escalated. Why he drew a weapon on a Navy instructor in a parking lot with security cameras running. It's not consistent with the careful, methodical criminal we've been tracking. She looked at the Navy investigators. Unless he was trying to create a diversion, unless he was sacrificing himself to protect someone else. Commander Sarah Ellis, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, spoke up. You think the assault on Petty Officer Ramsay was designed to draw attention away from something? Or someone, Kane agreed. We had Brennan under surveillance, he knew it, must have known it. So he creates this spectacular, undeniable crime that puts him in custody and puts all our attention on him. Meanwhile, his accomplice has time to cover their tracks, destroy evidence, disappear. That's some loyalty, one of the agents observed. Taking a 20-year prison sentence to protect your partner. Or some fear, Kane countered. Maybe Brennan wasn't protecting his partner. Maybe his partner was threatening him. Maybe this was the only way to get into protective custody without admitting to anything. Ellis pulled up a separate file on her tablet. We've been doing our own inventory audits, cross-referencing against the weapons you've recovered from Operation Steel Pipeline. We've found discrepancies going back 18 months. 67 weapons unaccounted for, all from Coronado armories, all during periods when Brennan was on base for joint training exercises. Who had access during those periods? Kane asked. That's the problem. Hundreds of people. SEAL candidates, instructors, administrative personnel, security staff, contractors. The only way to move weapons out undetected would be someone with both access and authority, someone nobody would question. Kane pulled up another photograph. A distinguished man in navy dress whites, Admiral James Ramsay, chest full of ribbons, confident smile. Tell me about Petty Officer Ramsay's father. Ellis studied the image. Admiral Ramsay was a legend, 36 years of service, SEAL team operations across multiple conflicts, wrote portions of the current close quarters combat manual, died of cancer in 2019. Who inherited his access credentials? They would have been deactivated upon his death. Would have been, Kane repeated, but were they? Ellis's expression darkened. You think someone's using a dead admiral's credentials? I think we need to check every possibility. Kane pulled up a new set of documents. Because here's what bothers me. Cole Brennan didn't just attack a random Navy instructor last night. He attacked the daughter of the man whose credentials might be the key to this entire operation. That's not coincidence. You think Elena Ramsay is involved? Ellis sounded skeptical. I think someone wanted us to think she might be. What better way to cast suspicion than to have Brennan attack her? Create a narrative where she's either guilty and he's trying to silence her, or she's innocent and he's trying to frame her. Kane leaned against the table. We need to interview her, today, before she has time to coordinate with anyone. But Ellis was shaking her head. I've met Elena Ramsay. She's beyond reproach. Her father's legacy is everything to her. She wouldn't dishonor his memory by trafficking weapons. Everyone has a price, Kane said. Student loans, medical bills, family problems. We need to look at her finances, her associations, her access logs for the past 18 months. You're making a mistake, Ellis insisted. Elena Ramsay defended herself against an armed assault last night. She's a victim, not a suspect. Maybe, Kane said. Or maybe she's an exceptionally good actress. Either way, we need answers, and we need them before whoever is actually behind this has time to disappear. The room descended into planning, assigning tasks, coordinating interviews, building timelines, but in the back of Kane's mind something nagged at her, a detail that didn't fit. She pulled up the parking lot footage again, watched Alina's response to the attack, the calm, the precision, the complete absence of panic. Most people, when confronted with a knife-wielding attacker, freeze. Fight or flight response takes over. Even trained individuals hesitate. But Alina hadn't hesitated, hadn't frozen, had moved with the kind of fluid certainty that comes from deep, instinctive training, or from expecting the attack. Kane rewound the footage, watched Alina's positioning before Cole approached, the way she'd parked in the far corner, the way her hand had already been near her pepper spray, the way she'd maintained perfect tactical awareness. It could be explained by good training, or it could be explained by foreknowledge. She made a note in her file, question parking lot positioning, determine if Ramsay had reason to expect confrontation. Because here's what Kane had learned in 18 years of federal law enforcement. The simplest explanation is usually correct, but sometimes the simplest explanation is a lie designed to look like truth, and the only way to distinguish between them is to question everything. Even heroes, especially heroes, because the best criminals hide behind the best cover stories. And what better cover story than being the innocent daughter of an admiral? What better way to move weapons than using the access and trust that came with a legendary name? Kane didn't want Alina to be guilty, but she'd arrested too many people who'd hidden behind too many good reputations to trust appearances anymore. So she'd investigate, thoroughly, professionally, without bias or assumptions. And if Alina Ramsay was innocent, Kane would prove it, would clear her name and apologize for the intrusion. But if she was guilty, even slightly, even unknowingly, Kane would find the evidence, would follow it wherever it led, because that's what justice required. Meanwhile, in a holding cell at Naval Special Warfare Center Coronado, Cole Brennan sat alone. No lawyer yet, no statement given, just silence. He wasn't worried about the assault charges, wasn't concerned about the evidence. The parking lot footage showed everything. Clear, undeniable, 20 years in federal prison at minimum, his career over, his life as he'd known it finished. But he was smiling, small, satisfied, because the play had worked, the sacrifice had been accepted. And 300 miles away, in a storage unit in Los Angeles, Marcus Chen was moving the last of the weapons out of state, destroying records, eliminating evidence, making sure that when the feds finally finished investigating Cole Brennan, they'd find nothing that led back to the real operation. Cole had known for months that they were being watched, had spotted the surveillance, recognized the pattern. He'd reached out to his contact, the one with access to the Coronado armories, the one who'd made this whole operation possible, and together they'd planned this. A dramatic, violent act that would consume all the federal attention while the real evidence disappeared. It required sacrifice, required Cole to throw away his freedom, but it also paid well, very well. The money was already moving, untraceable. By the time he went to trial, his family would be set for life, his daughter's college fund filled, his wife's medical bills paid, the house mortgage satisfied, all the financial burdens that had driven him to this in the first place eliminated. And all it cost was 20 years, maybe 15 with good behavior. He was 36, would be out at 51, still time to rebuild, still time to see his daughter graduate college, still time to be something other than a soldier who'd brought the war home in all the wrong ways. The door opened. 2 federal agents entered, professional, serious, ready to begin the interrogation. Cole said nothing, just smiled, because he'd already won. The mission was complete, his family was safe. And when they asked him about his accomplice, about the person helping him move weapons, he'd say nothing, give them nothing, take all the blame himself. Because that's what operators did. They completed the mission, whatever the cost, however necessary, and they protected their team. Even when the team was just one person, one insider, one trusted source with access to everything. One ghost operating under a dead admiral's credentials. Sometimes loyalty isn't about honor. Sometimes it's about survival. And sometimes the strongest bond is between criminals who have agreed to protect each other at any cost. Even the cost of everything. What happens when the victim becomes the suspect? Morning came cold and gray, fog rolling in from the Pacific so thick you could barely see 20 feet ahead, the kind of weather that makes everything feel isolated, uncertain. Alina stood on the beach at 0545, 15 minutes before her candidates were scheduled to arrive. She'd been there since 0500, unable to sleep, unable to stay in her apartment where every sound made her relive the parking lot, the knife, the threat, the cold calculation of violence deferred. Dutch had stayed with her until 0300, made sure she wasn't alone, made sure she was processing what had happened, but even his presence couldn't stop the flashbacks. The way Cole's expression had shifted from rage to satisfaction, the weight of her father's dog tags against her chest, the realization that everything could have ended differently. That if Porter had moved faster, if Anders had chosen differently, if the security patrol had arrived 30 seconds later, she might not be standing on this beach watching the fog. She might be in a morgue, while they explained to Dutch what had happened to Admiral Ramsay's daughter. Figured you'd be here early. Alina turned. Dutch emerged from the fog like a ghost, carrying 2 cups of coffee, steam rising in the cold air. Couldn't sleep, she admitted. Neither could I. He handed her one of the cups, kept thinking about what almost happened, about how close. He didn't finish, didn't need to. They both understood. Violence is always measured in inches and seconds. A knife blade 8 inches long traveling through air at 15 feet per second. The difference between a defensive block and a fatal wound measured in fractions of time too small to perceive. Warriors lived in those fractions. Understood that survival was often just luck dressed up as skill. Federal agents came by my house at 0400, Dutch said quietly, asking questions about you, about your father, about access to armories and weapon inventories. Alina's hands tightened on the coffee cup. They think I'm involved in something. They think someone at Coronado has been helping traffic weapons off base, someone with access and authority, someone who wouldn't raise suspicions. Dutch met her eyes. They're looking at everyone with armory access, including you. I'm a hand-to-hand combat instructor. I don't have armory access beyond checking out training weapons. Your father did, Admiral-level clearance, access to everything. Dutch's voice was careful, measured. They're checking to see if his credentials were properly deactivated after he died, checking if someone might have used them. Alina felt something cold settle in her stomach. They think I used my father's credentials to steal weapons. They think someone did. They don't know who yet. But given that Cole Brennan attacked you specifically, they're wondering if there's a connection. What kind of connection? Maybe he was your accomplice and turned on you. Maybe you were both involved and had a falling out. Maybe he knew something about you and you tried to silence him. Dutch held up a hand. I don't believe any of that, but I've been around investigations long enough to know how they think. They'll follow every thread until something unravels. Alina turned to look at the ocean, waves rolling and steady and inevitable, the same way they had when her father stood on this beach, the same way they would long after she was gone. My father's legacy is all I have left of him. If they destroy that with false accusations, then we prove them wrong. Dutch moved to stand beside her. We cooperate, we show them your records, your access logs, your finances, everything clean, everything above board, and we trust that truth matters. Does it? Alina's voice was harder than she intended. Cole Brennan attacked me with a knife, and I'm the one being investigated. How is that truth mattering? Because you're still here, still standing, still able to teach your candidates. Dutch gestured toward the training grounds. Cole's in a federal holding cell waiting for arraignment, his career over, his freedom gone, and you're exactly where you've always been. That's truth winning. Alina wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that innocence was its own protection, but she'd seen too much, served in too many places where truth lost to convenience, where accusations became facts through repetition rather than evidence. "What do I do?" she asked quietly. "You do your job, you teach your candidates, you live your life exactly as you always have." Dutch's voice was firm. "And when the agents come to interview you, and they will, you tell them the truth, all of it, every detail, because you have nothing to hide." Candidates began emerging from the fog, 60 men in physical training gear, ready for another day of testing, another day of proving they had what it took to become SEALs. They fell into formation without being told, discipline beaten into them through weeks of training. Alina drained her coffee, set the cup aside, walked to the head of the formation, let her eyes scan the rows. These men were depending on her knowledge, her training, her father's legacy. She couldn't let suspicion or investigation interfere with that. "Morning," she called out, her voice steady, strong. "Today we're working water insertion, full gear, cold water, psychological stress simulation. Some of you won't make it, that's fine. Better to fail here than fail in theater when lives depend on you." The candidates responded with focused attention. No questions about last night. No curiosity about why their instructor looked tired. Just warriors ready to be forged. As the training began, as Alina moved through the familiar rhythms of instruction and correction, she felt her mind settling. This was real, concrete. Her father had stood in this same position, taught similar men, passed on knowledge that saved lives. She was part of that chain, part of that legacy, and no federal investigation could take that away unless she let it. 3 hours later, covered in salt water and exhaustion, Alina dismissed the candidates. They filed off the beach, heading to breakfast and rest. She was gathering her equipment when a voice called her name. "Petty Officer Ramsey." Alina turned. Two people approached through the dispersing fog, professional clothing, federal IDs already visible. Agent Victoria Kane and Commander Sarah Ellis from NCIS. "I'm Agent Kane, FBI. This is Commander Ellis, NCIS. We'd like to ask you some questions about last night's incident and some related matters. Would you be willing to come to our office for a recorded interview?" Alina glanced at Dutch. He gave a small nod. "Go, cooperate. Show them you have nothing to hide." "Of course," Alina said, "but I'd like to shower and change first. I assume this isn't an arrest." "No, ma'am, just routine questions." Kane's expression was neutral, professional. "Would 1,000 hours at the NCIS office work for you?" "I'll be there." Kane and Ellis left. Dutch moved to Alina's side. "Want me to come with you?" "No, I need to do this alone. If I show up with representation, they'll think I have something to hide. If you show up alone, they'll try to use that against you." Dutch's voice carried the weight of experience. "At least talk to Jag first. Get advice." "I don't need advice. I need them to see I'm not hiding anything." Alina started walking toward the locker room. "I'll answer their questions, show them I'm innocent, and then I'll get back to my job." But as she walked, she felt the weight of suspicion following her. Felt the way simple truth could become complicated when viewed through lenses of doubt. Her father had taught her that honor was its own defense, that living with integrity meant never fearing investigation. But he'd also taught her that institutions protect themselves before they protect individuals, that careers could be destroyed by association even when innocence was proven, that sometimes the process itself was the punishment. She thought about Admiral James Ramsey, about his decades of service, his spotless record, his legacy built on honor and sacrifice, and she wondered what he would do in this situation. Would he cooperate fully? Would he lawyer up? Would he fight back against accusations before they were even formally made? Then she remembered one of his lessons, from when she was 12. They'd been hiking in the mountains near San Diego. She'd asked him what he'd do if someone accused him of something he didn't do. Tell the truth, he'd said simply. Every time, no matter the cost, because truth is like water. It finds its way through eventually. Lies require constant maintenance. Truth just requires patience. But what if people don't believe you? He'd stopped walking, looked at her with those steady blue eyes. Then you keep living the truth, keep being the person you know you are. And eventually reality catches up to reputation. It might take years, might cost you things. But in the end, truth wins because lies can't sustain themselves forever. Alina had believed him then, still believed him now, even as she showered, changed into her dress uniform, prepared to walk into a federal office and answer questions designed to find cracks in her story, find inconsistencies that might suggest guilt. Because here's what Cole Brennan's attack had really accomplished: not just attempted murder, but casting doubt on everyone around him, creating a cloud of suspicion that would take months to clear. And in those months, reputations would be damaged, careers would stall, lives would be disrupted. Maybe that was the real plan all along, not to hurt Alina, but to use her as the focal point of an investigation that would consume so much time and resources that the real criminals could disappear. At 0950, Alina walked into the NCIS building, signed in, was escorted to a conference room. Kane and Ellis were already there, recording equipment set up, water bottles placed with careful casualness, the whole room designed to feel comfortable while being completely controlled. "Thank you for coming, Petty Officer Ramsay," Kane began. "Let's start with last night. Tell us in your own words what happened." And Alina did, detailed, precise. Every moment from leaving the building to the security patrol arriving. She held nothing back, described Cole's behavior, Porter's hesitation, Anders's disappearance, the knife, the takedown, the satisfaction in Cole's expression when he was arrested. Kane took notes, asked clarifying questions, circled back to specific details. The entire time her expression remained neutral, professional, giving nothing away. "Tell us about your relationship with Staff Sergeant Brennan before yesterday," Kane said. "I didn't have one. Yesterday was the first time I'd ever met him. He specifically requested you as the demonstration partner for the joint training." Alina felt something cold touch her spine. "I didn't know that. Lieutenant Commander Mitchell assigned me to the training. I assumed it was routine." Kane consulted her notes. "According to emails we've recovered, Brennan requested the Ramsay instructor specifically, used your father's name, said he wanted to learn from Admiral Ramsay's techniques. That's not unusual. My father's methods are well known. People request training specifically because of his legacy, or because they wanted to get close to you for other reasons." Alina met Kane's eyes steadily. "What reasons would those be, Agent Kane?" "That's what we're trying to determine." Kane leaned forward slightly. "We're investigating large-scale weapons trafficking out of naval special warfare facilities, specifically Coronado. We believe someone with inside access has been diverting weapons for the past 18 months. We believe Cole Brennan was involved, and we believe he had help from someone with Admiral-level access credentials." The room went silent. Alina felt her pulse in her throat. "You think I've been stealing weapons?" "We think someone has," Kane corrected, "and we're looking at everyone with possible access, including you." "I don't have Admiral-level access. I'm a petty officer. I teach hand-to-hand combat." "Your father did, and his credentials may not have been properly deactivated after his death." Kane pulled up a document on her tablet. "Can you tell me where you were on the following dates?" She rattled off 8 dates spanning the past year. Alina thought back. "I'd need to check my calendar for specifics, but generally I'm either teaching or in training myself. My schedule is documented. And in the evenings, weekends. Sometimes home, sometimes on base if I have extra work. Alina kept her voice level. Agent Kane, I understand you need to investigate, but I'm not involved in weapons trafficking. I've dedicated my life to serving honorably, to upholding my father's legacy. The suggestion that I would dishonor that legacy by stealing weapons is insulting and incorrect. Then help us prove it, Kane said. Consent to a full review of your finances, your phone records, your access logs. Let us clear you definitively so we can focus on who's actually responsible. Alina wanted to refuse, wanted to demand a warrant, wanted to make them work for every piece of information. But she heard her father's voice. Truth is like water. It finds its way through. Fine, she said. Review whatever you need. I have nothing to hide. Kane smiled slightly. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be in touch. The interview continued for another hour. Questions about her father, about who had keys to his house after he died, about whether she'd ever noticed suspicious activity in the armories, about her relationships with other instructors, candidates, staff. By the time Alina left, it was 1200 hours. Her uniform felt too tight. Her chest ached, and for the first time since her father's death, she felt truly alone. Dutch was waiting outside. How'd it go? They think I'm trafficking weapons, using my dead father's credentials. Dutch's jaw tightened. They said that. They said they're investigating everyone, but yes, that's what they think. Alina started walking toward her vehicle, then remembered she couldn't drive it. It was still impounded as evidence. Can you give me a ride? Of course. Dutch fell into step beside her. Cat, they're fishing. They don't have evidence. If they did, you'd be in custody right now. They're destroying my reputation while they fish. Every instructor, every candidate, everyone on this base is going to hear that I'm under investigation, that I might be dirty, that Admiral Ramsay's daughter might have betrayed everything he stood for. Her voice cracked slightly. How do I come back from that? The same way your father would. You keep doing your job, keep being who you are, and you trust that truth matters. Dutch stopped walking, turned to face her. Listen to me. I knew your father for 40 years. I know you. You're not capable of what they're suggesting. Anyone who knows you knows that. This will pass. But Alina wasn't sure. Wasn't sure if truth really did win. Wasn't sure if patience was enough. Wasn't sure if her father had been right about honor being its own defense. Because sometimes honor makes you vulnerable. Sometimes integrity becomes a target. And sometimes the people trying to destroy you understand that the best way to win is to make you destroy yourself with doubt. Somewhere Cole Brennan was sitting in a cell, smiling, because he'd accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. Not hurt Alina Ramsay, but make everyone wonder if she'd hurt herself. And in the space between accusation and proof, reputations died. Sometimes dignity doesn't just require standing firm. Sometimes it requires surviving the slow erosion of certainty, the quiet destruction of trust, the patient dismantling of everything you've built. And the only way through is to keep building, keep standing, keep being exactly who you've always been, even when the world insists you must be someone else. When does justice require breaking all the rules? 3 days passed like years. Alina taught her classes, ran her drills, maintained her professional demeanor, but she could feel it. The looks, the whispers, the way conversations stopped when she entered the instructor's lounge, the way candidates asked fewer questions, as if afraid that association with her might taint them too. The federal investigation had leaked, not officially, but through that mysterious institutional osmosis that makes secrets impossible to keep. By day 2, everyone at Coronado knew that Petty Officer Ramsay was being investigated for weapons trafficking. By day 3, rumors had evolved. Some said she'd been arrested. Some said she'd been caught red-handed. Some said her father had been involved too, that the legendary Admiral Ramsay had actually been running weapons for years before cancer killed him. Each rumor felt like a knife, sharper than Cole's blade, more damaging than any physical wound, because this cut at something deeper, at legacy, at memory, at the careful construction of a life built on principles that were now being publicly questioned. Dutch stayed close, made a point of sitting with her at meals, walking with her across base, showing everyone that he believed in her, but even his support couldn't stop the whispers, couldn't prevent the slow poison of doubt from spreading. On the evening of day 3, Alina's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Petty Officer Ramsey, a male voice, gravelly, nervous. "Who is this?" "My name is Frank Garrison, Master Chief, retired. I served with your father in the Gulf War. I need to talk to you, in person, tonight." Alina felt exhaustion pull at her. "I'm not really in a position to meet strangers right now. I know about the investigation. I know what they think you did, and I know you didn't do it." A pause, "because I know who did." Alina's grip tightened on the phone. "What?" "I can't talk on the phone. Meet me at the harbor, Pier 7, 2100 hours. Come alone. If I see anyone else, I disappear." Another pause. "Your father saved my life in Iraq, twice. I owe him the truth about what happened to his access credentials, but I'll only tell you face to face." The line went dead. Alina stared at her phone. Every instinct screamed trap. This was exactly how people got ambushed, how investigations went sideways, how innocent people made themselves look guilty. But she also heard opportunity, a chance to learn something the federal agents might never find, a chance to clear her father's name and her own. She called Dutch, told him about the conversation. "Absolutely not," he said immediately. "This is either a trap or a setup. Either way, you go alone to a deserted pier at night, you're putting yourself in danger. What if he really does know something? Then he can tell it to the federal agents, through proper channels. Dutch, you know how this works. Retired enlisted don't trust federal agents. They don't trust investigations, but they trust the Admiral's daughter." Alina made her decision. "I'm going." "Then I'm coming with you." He said, "Come alone." "I'll stay in the car, out of sight, but I'm not letting you walk into potential danger by yourself." Dutch's voice carried the tone that meant argument was pointless. "I'll pick you up at 2000 hours." The sun was setting when they pulled up to the harbor, parking lot mostly empty, fishing boats tied up for the night, the smell of salt and diesel and old wood. Pier 7 stretched out into the darkness, single light at the end, barely illuminating anything. "This feels wrong," Dutch said. "Cat, please don't do this." "Wait here. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, call security." Alina climbed out of the truck, started walking toward the pier. Each step felt weighted, the dock creaked under her feet, water lapped against pilings. Somewhere in the distance a seal barked, normal sounds, peaceful, but her pulse was racing. At the end of the pier a man waited, 60-something, gray beard, wearing a ratty Coronado sweatshirt. He looked like 1,000 other retired military guys, weathered, tired, carrying the weight of things he'd seen and couldn't forget. "Master Chief Garrison." Alina stopped 10 feet away, kept her distance. "Call me Frank. Your father never liked formality when it was just operators talking." He gestured to a bench. "Sit. This is going to take a minute." Alina remained standing. "You said you knew about my father's access credentials." "I did because I'm the one who gave them to Cole Brennan." Frank's voice cracked slightly. "Your father's credentials were deactivated when he died, properly, by the book, but I had copies. Backup codes he'd given me years ago when we were running operations that required absolute discretion. I kept them, shouldn't have, but I did." "Why?" "Because sometimes the system fails the people who need help. Sometimes warriors fall through cracks, can't access benefits, can't get treatment, can't navigate bureaucracy." Frank met her eyes. "Your father understood that. He gave me those codes so I could help guys who needed help, cut through red tape. access programs that were technically available but practically impossible to reach. Alina felt her world tilting. You were using my father's credentials for unauthorized access. For good reasons, to help people your father knew, approved, trusted me to do right by his name. Frank's hands shook slightly. But then my wife got sick, cancer, same kind that took your father, and the VA kept denying treatment, kept saying experimental, not covered, wait 6 months for appeals. She didn't have 6 months. Alina understood where this was going, the terrible logic of desperation. Cole Brennan approached me 2 years ago, Frank continued. Said he knew people who could pay cash for military equipment, said it was small stuff, non-lethal, tactical gear that was going to surplus anyway. He said if I helped him, he'd pay enough to cover my wife's treatment. You agreed. I agreed, started using your father's credentials to manipulate inventory records, make weapons disappear on paper. Cole would move them physically. We split the money. My wife got treatment. Frank's voice was hollow. At first it was just a few rifles, then more, then modifications, then high-capacity magazines. It kept escalating. By the time I realized what we were really doing, I was in too deep to stop. You were arming criminals. I was saving my wife's life. Frank's composure cracked. You think I don't know what I did? You think I don't hate myself every day? But Sarah is alive. The treatment worked. She's in remission. And that only happened because I betrayed everything your father stood for. Alina felt sick. This was worse than she'd imagined. Not just weapons trafficking, but using her father's name, his legacy, his trust. Why are you telling me this? Because they're investigating you, making you carry the weight of what I did, and I can't let that happen. Frank pulled out a USB drive. This has everything: transaction records, access logs, communications with Cole, proof that you weren't involved, proof that I used your father's credentials without your knowledge. Alina stared at the drive. If I give this to the FBI, you go to prison. I know. You'll lose your retirement, your benefits, everything. I know. Frank held out the drive. But Sarah will still have her treatment. She'll still be alive. And your father's daughter won't have her life destroyed because of my choices. Alina took the drive, held it in her hand. This small piece of plastic contained evidence that would clear her name, destroy Frank, and prove that her father's trust had been betrayed by someone he'd considered a brother. Your father saved my life, Frank said quietly, twice in Iraq, pulled me out of an overturned Humvee while we were taking fire. Second time he called in medevac when I was bleeding out from shrapnel, said he couldn't lose his Master Chief, not when there was still work to do. He smiled sadly. I'm trying to do work now, the kind of work he'd understand, protecting his daughter, even if it costs me everything. Alina looked at this broken man. This warrior who'd made terrible choices for understandable reasons, who was now trying to make it right in the only way he knew how. Go home to your wife, Alina said softly. I'll give this to the FBI, but I'll also make sure they understand why you did what you did, that you're cooperating fully, that you're not the real criminal here. Cole is. He used my desperation, played on my fears, turned me into something I never wanted to be. Frank stood. Tell Agent Kane that Cole has a storage unit in Los Angeles, Unit 247 at Secure Space on Alameda. That's where the remaining weapons are. That's how she closes this case. How do you know Cole hasn't already emptied it? Because he can't. I have the only key. He needed me for access. That's why he wanted me to stay quiet. Why he staged that attack on you to distract everyone while I could destroy evidence. Frank handed her a key. But I'm done running, done hiding. Your father taught me that honor means owning your mistakes, so I'm owning mine. He walked past her, down the pier, into the darkness. Alina stood there holding a USB drive and a key, evidence that would unravel weeks of investigation, clear her name, destroy a man who was trying to do the right thing in the worst possible way. She walked back to Dutch's truck, climbed in. We need to go to the NCIS office, now. What happened? I got the truth. Alina stared at the USB drive, and it's worse than I thought. Agent Kane was still in her office at 2200 hours. She looked up when Alina walked in with Dutch. Surprise crossed her face. Petty Officer Ramsay, this is unexpected. Alina placed the USB drive and key on Kane's desk. This contains evidence of who's been trafficking weapons using my father's credentials. Names, dates, access records, and the location of the remaining stolen weapons. Kane picked up the items. Where did you get this? From Master Chief Frank Garrison, retired. He contacted me 3 hours ago, confessed to everything, gave me this voluntarily. Alina met Kane's eyes. He's willing to testify, to cooperate fully, but I want it on record that he came forward, that he's trying to make this right. Kane called in her team. They spent the next 4 hours going through the drive. Alina and Dutch watched from the conference room as federal agents moved into focused action. Phone calls, warrants, tactical teams deployed to Los Angeles. By 0300, they had Marcus Chen in custody. By 0400, they'd seized enough weapons from the storage unit to fill 3 evidence trucks. Commander Ellis came into the conference room. It all checks out. Garrison's records are detailed, comprehensive. This closes the case. What about Petty Officer Ramsay? Dutch asked. Completely exonerated. It's clear she had no knowledge or involvement. Ellis turned to Alina. I'm sorry for what you went through. The investigation was necessary, but that doesn't make it easier. Alina nodded, too exhausted to feel vindicated, too tired to feel relief. What happens to Frank? He'll be charged with weapons trafficking, unauthorized access to classified systems, and fraud, looking at significant prison time. Ellis paused. But his cooperation will be noted, might reduce his sentence. His wife has cancer. That will also be noted. Ellis's expression softened. We're not monsters, Petty Officer Ramsay. We understand context, but we also have to enforce the law. When Alina and Dutch finally left the building, dawn was breaking, pink and gold spreading across the harbor. She felt hollowed out, emptied, but also strangely at peace. You did the right thing, Dutch said, turning over that evidence. Did I? Frank's going to prison because I brought that drive to Kane. Frank was going to prison eventually anyway. At least this way he went with honor, protecting you, making amends. Dutch started the truck. Your father would have understood that, would have respected it. Alina thought about Frank's confession, about the terrible choices people make when they're desperate, about how honor can be compromised one small decision at a time, until you wake up and realize you've become someone you never intended to be. My father's credentials were used to traffic weapons. His name was part of this. His credentials, not his choice, not his knowledge. Dutch pulled out of the parking lot. Your father's legacy is what he built, not what others did with tools he left behind. They drove in silence for a while, watching the sun rise over Coronado, over the base where Admiral Ramsay had trained countless warriors, where his daughter now carried on his work, where his name was still spoken with respect and reverence. Frank said my father gave him those credentials to help people, Alina said quietly, to cut through bureaucracy, to make sure warriors got the care they'd earned. That sounds like your father. It also sounds like the kind of thing that could be abused. That could lead to exactly what happened. Maybe, but it could also save lives, help people who fall through the cracks. Dutch glanced at her. Your father didn't think in black and white, he thought in shades of necessary. Sometimes following every rule meant letting good people suffer, so he bent rules that needed bending, and mostly that worked. This time it didn't. Alina understood the terrible weight of command, the impossible choices between policy and humanity, the way good intentions could lead to disasters. I'm not investigating you anymore. Agent Kane's voice came through Alina's phone an hour later. She'd called on a secure line. Your father's credentials were used without authorization by Frank Garrison. You're completely clear. Thank you. We'll need you to testify at Garrison's trial, and probably Cole Brennan's. I'll be there. One more thing. Kane's voice shifted, became more personal. I'm sorry for suspecting you, for making you live under that cloud. I was doing my job, but that doesn't make it right. Alina wanted to be angry, wanted to hold onto the resentment, but she also understood that Kane had been doing exactly what she was supposed to do, following evidence, questioning everyone, refusing to let reputation shield the guilty. You were thorough, Alina said. That's what justice requires. Justice also requires recognizing when we're wrong. You handled this with more grace than most people would have. A pause. Your father would have been proud. When Alina finally made it back to her apartment, exhaustion claimed her. She slept for 12 hours, dreamless, heavy, the kind of sleep that comes when your body finally believes the danger has passed. When she woke, Dutch had left a message. Frank Garrison had been arrested at his home, charged formally, released on bond pending trial. His wife Sarah had been there, held his hand through the whole process, told the agents that her husband was a good man who'd made terrible choices to save her life. Alina thought about that, about love and desperation, about the things people sacrifice for those they care about how honor sometimes meant accepting consequences, and sometimes meant showing mercy to those who'd fallen. 3 weeks later, Alina stood before a military tribunal. Frank Garrison sat at the defense table, quiet, dignified, accepting responsibility for everything. When they asked Alina to speak about her father's legacy, about whether it had been tarnished by what Garrison had done, she looked at the tribunal, at the officers judging this broken warrior. My father believed in redemption, she said clearly. He believed that warriors who fell could find their way back. That honor wasn't about perfection. It was about owning your mistakes and trying to make them right, she gestured to Frank. Master Chief Garrison made terrible choices, but he also came forward, confessed everything, helped close an investigation that would have gone on for months, saved me from being wrongly implicated. That doesn't erase his crimes, but it shows character. The tribunal sentenced Frank to 15 years, eligible for parole in 10 with good behavior. His military retirement was stripped, his benefits reduced, but the judge noted his cooperation, his remorse, his attempt to make amends. As they led him away, Frank caught Alina's eye, mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." Alina nodded, understanding passing between 2 people who'd both loved Admiral Ramsay, who'd both been shaped by his legacy, who'd both learned that honor wasn't simple or clean, that it required navigating impossible choices and accepting when you failed to meet your own standards. Sometimes dignity doesn't just mean standing firm. Sometimes it means showing mercy, understanding that everyone carries their own battles, their own compromises, their own attempts to balance what's right against what's necessary. And sometimes, justice requires recognizing that the people who break rules might have been trying to hold together something more important than the rules themselves. How do you rebuild a legacy that was never actually broken? 6 months passed. The investigation closed. Cole Brennan pleaded guilty to attempted murder and weapons trafficking, received 22 years federal prison. Frank Garrison began serving his sentence. His wife Sarah's cancer remained in remission. She visited him every week without fail. Life at Coronado returned to normal, or as normal as it ever was at a facility dedicated to forging warriors. Alina taught her classes, refined the Ramsay method, added new techniques based on the parking lot confrontation, how to defend against knife attacks, how to maintain composure under stress, how to trust your training when everything inside you screams panic. The candidates responded, her classes filled. Her reputation, damaged by suspicion, rebuilt itself through consistency and competence. Slowly, the whispers stopped, the looks faded. People remembered who she was rather than what she'd been accused of. But something had changed, something fundamental. Alina understood now that legacy was fragile, that reputations built over decades could be questioned in moments. That honor required constant maintenance, constant vigilance, constant willingness to defend not just against external threats but against internal doubt. She thought about her father more now, not the legend, the man, the person who'd made difficult choices, who'd bent rules for good reasons, who trusted people who sometimes failed that trust. She understood him better now, understood that perfection wasn't the goal. That wisdom meant knowing when to follow rules and when to recognize that rules were created by humans and sometimes failed to account for human complexity. One morning, Dutch found her on the beach before dawn, standing where her father had stood, watching the ocean. "You're out here a lot lately," he observed. "Thinking about—" Alina turned to face him. "About whether my father would be proud of how I handled all this, whether I made the right choices, whether I protected his legacy or damaged it." Dutch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father would tell you that legacy isn't about what others say. It's about what you do. You taught your candidates. You maintained your integrity. You showed mercy to a man who'd betrayed trust but was trying to make amends. That's exactly what your father would have done. He also would have prevented this whole situation by properly securing his credentials. Maybe, or maybe he trusted that the people he gave those credentials to would honor that trust. Most did. Frank didn't, but that's Frank's failure, not your father's." Dutch moved to stand beside her. "You can't protect against every possibility. Sometimes you have to trust. Sometimes that trust is betrayed. The question isn't whether you could have prevented it. The question is how you respond when trust breaks." Alina thought about that, about Frank's confession, about the USB drive, about choosing to turn over evidence that would destroy someone who was trying to help her. "I sent a man to prison. You gave the truth to people who needed it. Frank sent himself to prison when he made his choices. His wife had cancer." "I know," Dutch's voice was gentle. "That doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it. And understanding why someone fails doesn't mean you pretend they didn't fail. It means you hold them accountable while also holding space for their humanity." The sun was rising, gold and pink spreading across the water. Alina watched it and thought about second chances, about redemption, about the way her father had believed that warriors who fell could find their way back. "I wrote a letter to Frank," she said quietly. "Told him I'd visit once a month, help him maintain his connection to the community." Dutch smiled. "Your father would have done the same thing." "Would he, or am I being weak? Showing mercy to someone who used his name to traffic weapons?" "You're being human, recognizing that people are complex, that they can do terrible things for understandable reasons, that punishment and mercy aren't opposites. They're both parts of justice." Dutch paused. "Your father understood that, lived it, taught it to everyone who served under him." Later that day, Lieutenant Commander Mitchell called Alina into his office. When she arrived, he had paperwork spread across his desk. "I've received authorization to create a new position," he said. "Advanced Combat Training Program Director. You'd be responsible for developing and implementing defensive tactics training across all SEAL teams. Your father's methods would become official doctrine, preserved, taught, standardized." Alina looked at the paperwork, at the official designation, at her father's name in the position description. "There's one condition," Mitchell continued. "You'd need to attend the Senior Enlisted Academy, get formal recognition as a subject matter expert, spend 2 years traveling to different bases implementing the program." 2 years away from Coronado. "Yes, but you'd be spreading your father's legacy across the entire SEAL community, training instructors who'd trained thousands of warriors, ensuring his methods survive for generations." Alina thought about it, about staying here in her comfort zone, or about expanding her reach, taking her father's work to places he'd never imagined. "I accept," she said. Mitchell nodded. You're your father's daughter. He always chose the hard right over the easy wrong. That evening, Alina visited Frank Garrison at the Federal Correctional Facility in Lompoc. The visiting room was sterile, uncomfortable, designed to discourage any sense of normalcy. Frank appeared in prison oranges, grayer than she remembered, smaller somehow. "You didn't have to come," he said. "My father would have, so I am." They talked for an hour, about Sarah's health, about life in prison, about the programs Frank was enrolled in, addiction counseling even though he wasn't an addict, financial planning even though he had nothing, the small ways the system tried to rehabilitate people who'd made catastrophic choices. "I'm sorry," Frank said toward the end, "not just for what I did, but for putting you through that investigation, for making people question you. You also came forward, gave me evidence that cleared me. That counts for something." "Does it, or am I just trying to buy forgiveness with cooperation?" Alina thought about that question, about the complexity of motivation, about how people rarely do things for purely good or purely bad reasons. "Maybe both," she said honestly. "Maybe you're trying to make amends while also protecting yourself. Maybe those things aren't mutually exclusive. Maybe that's just being human." Frank smiled sadly. "Your father used to say that warriors weren't perfect, just people trying to do better than yesterday." He was right. When visiting hours ended, Alina walked back to her car. She felt lighter somehow, as if forgiving Frank had also meant forgiving her father, for trusting too much, for leaving tools that could be abused, for being human and fallible and complex. 6 months later, Alina stood in the newly dedicated Admiral James Ramsay Combat Training Center at Naval Special Warfare Headquarters. The facility was massive, state-of-the-art, designed specifically for teaching defensive tactics to operators across all teams. Her father's photograph hung in the lobby, below it a bronze plaque. "Admiral James Ramsay, 1945-2019 *. He taught us that honor isn't spoken, it's lived. That warriors are forged not just in combat, but in how they train others. That legacy isn't what you do, it's who you inspire to do it better." Dutch stood beside her, looking at the plaque. He would have hated having a building named after him. "I know," Alina smiled. "He always said real warriors don't need monuments. And yet here we are. Because sometimes monuments aren't for the person they honor, they're for the people who come after, to remind them what matters, what endures." She looked around the facility, at the training mats, at the equipment, at the spaces designed for teaching the Ramsay method to generations of warriors. Her father had developed these techniques over decades, had refined them through combat and training, had passed them to her with the expectation that she'd preserve them. But preservation wasn't enough. Evolution mattered, adaptation, taking core principles and applying them to new contexts. She'd added techniques he'd never taught, modified approaches he'd considered definitive, built on his foundation in ways he might not have imagined but would have respected. That was real legacy, not freezing someone in time, but letting their work grow, letting new people add their own innovations while respecting what came before. "You ready?" Dutch asked. Alina nodded. The facility was opening in an hour. 300 instructors from across the SEAL community gathered for the inaugural training. 5 days of intensive instruction in the Ramsay method. 5 days of passing on everything her father had taught her and everything she'd learned since his death. She walked into the main training hall, checked the equipment, reviewed her lesson plans, prepared to teach warriors who would carry her father's legacy into battles he'd never see, into conflicts he'd never imagined, into a future that would be shaped by principles he'd established decades ago. And as she prepared, she felt him there. Not literally, but in the way certain lessons echo through time, in the way wisdom transcends individual lifetimes, in the way a father's love survives in the daughter's determination to honor his memory while also becoming her own person. When the instructors filed in, Alina stood at the center of the mat, 300 faces looking at her with varying degrees of skepticism, respect, curiosity, and determination. "My father taught me that honor isn't about perfection," she began. "It's about integrity, about doing what's right even when it costs you, about standing firm when others fall, about showing mercy when circumstances warrant it, and about understanding that legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you earn, every single day." She gestured to the space around them. "This facility bears his name, but it exists because of all of you, because warriors need training, because techniques need teachers, because knowledge dies unless it's passed on." She paused. "My father's methods work, not because he was perfect, but because he tested them, refined them, proved them in combat and in training. What I'm going to teach you over the next 5 days represents 40 years of his work, but it also represents my innovations, my experiences, my understanding of how to apply these principles in contexts he never faced." She looked across the room, at faces representing decades of combined combat experience. Warriors who'd earned the right to be skeptical, who'd seen too many programs fail, too many techniques prove useless under stress. "I'm not asking you to trust my father's reputation," she said. "I'm asking you to test the techniques, challenge them, push them until they break or prove unbreakable. Because that's how we honor warriors like Admiral Ramsay, not by blindly accepting everything they taught, but by subjecting it to the same rigorous standards they used to develop it." Something shifted in the room. The skepticism remained but was joined by respect. These warriors understood rigorous testing, understood that true confidence came from successful failure, from techniques that survived every attempt to break them. "Let's begin," Alina said. And for 5 days she taught, demonstrated, corrected, refined, answered questions, addressed doubts, pushed 300 instructors to understand not just the techniques but the principles underlying them, the physics of leverage, the anatomy of joint manipulation, the psychology of remaining calm under extreme stress. On the final day, after the closing demonstration, as instructors prepared to return to their units, an old chief master at arms approached Alina. He must have been 70, gray beard, weathered face, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body had been broken and rebuilt multiple times. "I served with your father in Grenada," he said. 1983. I was 22, scared out of my mind. Your father spent 3 days teaching me defensive tactics before we went in, told me that fear was natural, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite fear." He paused, looked at the training hall, at the facility bearing her father's name. "He saved my life," the chief continued. "Not dramatically, not heroically, just by taking time to teach a scared kid how to survive. I've spent 40 years in the Navy, taught thousands of sailors, and every technique I teach I learned from him." He met Alina's eyes. "What you're doing here matters, not just for preserving his legacy, but for saving lives that don't exist yet, for preventing casualties in conflicts we haven't imagined. That's real honor, that's real legacy." Alina felt tears threatening, held them back. "Thank you, Chief." "No," he said softly. "Thank you for carrying forward work that matters more than most people understand." That night, alone in her quarters, Alina wrote in her journal, something she'd started doing after the investigation, a way to process everything that had happened. "Dad asterisk. 6 months ago, I thought I understood your legacy. Thought it was about techniques and training methods, about preserving what you'd created. But I was wrong. Your legacy isn't techniques, it's principles. It's the understanding that warriors matter, that teaching matters, that honor requires constant work, constant vigilance, constant willingness to do the hard thing. Frank Garrison betrayed your trust, used your credentials to commit crimes, but he also came forward, tried to make amends, showed me that people are complex, that failure doesn't define someone unless they refuse to acknowledge it. Cole Brennan tried to hurt me, threatened my life, destroyed his own career in the process, but he also showed me that wounded pride can be more dangerous than weapons, that understanding what drives people matters as much as defending against them. The investigation nearly destroyed me, made me question everything, but it also taught me that truth endures, that integrity is its own defense, that patience matters. I'm running your facility now, teaching your methods to hundreds of instructors, but I'm also adding my own innovations, adapting your work to new contexts, building on your foundation in ways you might not have imagined. Is that honoring you or changing you? I think maybe it's both. I think legacy means taking what came before and making it grow, making it evolve, making it serve new purposes while respecting original principles. You taught me that honor isn't spoken, it's lived. That dignity doesn't require validation, it simply acts. That warriors are defined not by perfect moments but by consistent effort to be better than yesterday. I'm trying to live that. Every day, in every class, with every candidate. I'm trying to be worthy of your name while also becoming my own person. I miss you, miss your guidance, miss knowing I could call you when things got hard, but I also know you're here, in every technique I teach, in every principle I uphold, in every moment when I choose the hard right over the easy wrong. Your legacy isn't breaking, it's growing, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it continues to grow, making sure new warriors benefit from your wisdom, making sure your work matters for generations to come. That's my promise to you, not perfection, but dedication, not blind preservation, but thoughtful evolution. Rest well, Dad. Your work continues, and it's in good hands. Love, Kat. She closed the journal, turned off the light, lay in the darkness listening to the distant sound of the ocean. The same ocean her father had listened to, the same waves that had witnessed his training sessions, the same timeless rhythm that connected past and present and future. Outside, Coronado slept. Candidates rested between days of brutal testing. Instructors prepared tomorrow's lessons. Warriors maintained eternal vigilance because freedom required it. Threats evolved. Techniques adapted, but principles endured. Honor, integrity, duty, sacrifice, service. These weren't abstract concepts. They were daily choices, moment-by-moment decisions to do what was right even when it cost everything, to stand firm even when standing was hard, to show mercy even when revenge felt justified, to build even when destruction seemed easier. Admiral James Ramsay had lived those principles, had taught them to thousands, had passed them to his daughter with the expectation that she'd carry them forward. And she was, every single day. Because that's what legacy really meant, not statues or plaques or buildings bearing names, but living principles, active choices, constant effort to honor what came before while creating what comes next. Sometimes dignity doesn't need monuments. Sometimes it just needs people willing to live by principles that matter, to teach those principles to others, to adapt them to new contexts while respecting their foundations. Sometimes honor is simply showing up, day after day, teaching, training, building, growing, making sure that wisdom doesn't die, that knowledge doesn't fade, that principles that matter continue to matter. And sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you accomplish. It's who you inspire to keep accomplishing after you're gone. Alina Ramsay had become that inspiration, not perfectly, not without mistakes, but consistently, honorably, with integrity intact and principles unwavering. Her father's daughter, her own person, a warrior forged not just in combat but in the harder work of teaching others to fight. The Admiral's legacy lived, not in buildings or photographs or plaques, but in every candidate she trained, every instructor she taught, every life saved by techniques passed down through generations of warriors who understood that strength isn't about size. It's about principle, about honor, about the daily choice to be better than yesterday. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in that action, in that consistent commitment to principle, legacy is built. Not once, but every single day. That's the real lesson. The one Admiral Ramsay taught. The one his daughter